This is Jerry Ward back with I Object, and my guest, Dr. Thomas Dilorenzo, the author of The Real Lincoln and Lincoln Unmasked, as well as other books. And, Tom, I want to get right into the constitutional issues that surround the Civil War. First of all, the whole idea of secession was something that was accepted by all the states, and especially the New England Yankees, since they tried to do it one time.
Right, yeah, the New Englanders, New England Federalists, the Federalist Party in New England, after Thomas Jefferson was elected in 1800, spent about 10 years plotting to secede. They even held a convention in Hartford, Connecticut, to vote up or down on the entire New England area seceding from the United States. And all during this time, no one questioned their right to secede. The only question was, is it wise economically and politically to do this? They eventually decided not to. But all up until the Civil War, until 1861, most Americans were of the opinion that the Union was voluntary, that the states did hold political conventions to vote up or down, and if they had been under the understanding that there was never any way out, that the Union was sort of a one-way Venus flytrap from which there could never be any escape, that they never would have endorsed the Constitution. They would never have been ratified. But that all changed at the point of a gun in the 1860s, and the Union was no longer voluntary after that. And that's why in my book I argue that Lincoln did not save the Union. He destroyed the voluntary Union that the Founding Fathers created. And he also destroyed the principle of citizen control of the central government, because the way in which the citizens were supposed to control their central government was through the vehicle of states' rights or federalism. You can call it either one, but it was citizen participation in politics at the state and local level that was supposed to be the vehicle to control their central government, and that was ended in 1865. Yeah. And on the legality, you asked about the constitutionality or the legality of secession. Congress itself knew that secession was legal in 1861 because they introduced several laws to make it illegal. Now, if they thought it was already illegal, they would not have introduced those laws to make it illegal. And then the war broke out, so nothing came of that. So I think that's proof that everyone knew that secession was perfectly legal.
Yeah, I don't think people out there are taught now how important the form of government that our founders gave us was in terms of decentralization, and how only having a decentralized government is key to individual liberties. And to me, that's going by the wayside because of the seeds that Lincoln sowed. Do you agree with that?
Well, sure, I certainly do, and that's and I'm pretty sure Ron Paul agrees with that. And it's not just the American system; it's all over the world. Philosophers and historians have understood for many generations that government needs to be kept as small as possible and as close to the people as possible to avoid having it become tyranny, to avoid tyranny. And this is not uniquely an American position. People have understood this for generation after generation. And, of course, we understood this in the United States for a long time. But I argue in my books that this was essentially ended in the 1860s when the central government sort of destroyed citizen control of it in the Civil War, because prior to that, many states had nullified federal laws. They had just issued proclamations through their state legislatures or through political conventions saying, we will not abide by this law because we think it is unconstitutional. It was not always true that we just looked at the Supreme Court as sort of black-robed deities who would tell all of us what our rights are. There was judicial review was around for a long time, but in the early part of the 19th century, even though we had judicial review, Andrew Jackson, for example, responded to some of the opinions of the Supreme Court by essentially saying, thank you for your opinion, but my opinion is different. And so we didn't just all kowtow to whatever the court said in those days like we do now.
Some states refused to collect federal tariffs and that sort of thing. before Lincoln.
So some of the southern states, South Carolina in particular, thought that a fair tariff law that was passed in the early 1830s was unconstitutional, so they refused to collect it. There are a lot of northern states that thought the Bank of the United States, which was a national bank, was unconstitutional, so states like Ohio imposed taxes on them, big taxes, $50,000 per branch per year. And this was in the 1830s that we're talking about, and so it wasn't just a Southern thing. It was an American principle that was called nullification in the early part of the 19th century. That, in addition to secession or the threat of secession, that was used to try to keep this potentially runaway central government in line, and that was all ended during the Civil War. We no longer have those abilities to use those tools to keep this government in line. And Ron Paul understands all of this. Unlike Tim Russert and all those talking heads that try to ridicule him for speaking truth to power.
Exactly. And now we have black-robed federal judges pushing us around and telling us what to do and no recourse.
That's right. One of the great champions of constitutional liberty that's come up and is also a big Ron Paul defender is Judge Andrew Napolitano, who's written some very good books on the Constitution in the last couple of years. And in one of his books, he points out that from the mid-1930s until 1997, the Supreme Court did not rule a single federal law to be unconstitutional. And so they essentially became a rubber stamp for whatever federal law the federal government wanted to pass, and really did not protect our liberties from the central government at all. And, of course, that was the original intent of the Constitution, to try to be a vehicle that would defend our liberties, not run roughshod over our liberties like it's been doing.
Yeah, one thing I want to talk about quickly, there's two more issues I want to talk about. One, how Lincoln ran roughshod over the Constitution, habeas corpus, arresting his opponents, like sitting senators and representatives. And then the second thing has to do with the Sherman's March to the Sea and the war crimes he committed. So why don't you address the first with regard to individual rights that Lincoln just ran roughshod over?
Okay, well, once I got into this literature on Lincoln, I found out that generations of scholars had referred to him as a dictator. And the reason why is he suspended habeas corpus illegally. Only Congress has the right to do that. And that enabled the military to mass arrest tens of thousands of northern civilians for merely opposing the Lincoln administration and putting them into jails, sometimes without even notifying their families. They would just disappear. They shut down over 300 opposition newspapers in the northern states. He deported a member of Congress who was a Democrat, Clement Vallandigham was his name. He was from Ohio, who ended up spending the rest of the war in exile in Canada. And he confiscated firearms in the border states in violation of the Second Amendment, confiscated private property. And these are the reasons why the mainstream Lincoln scholars call him a dictator, and because he was. And so as far as constitutional liberty is concerned in northern states during the war, it did not exist. Writers on this topic say the only place there was free speech was in the prisons. Once you're already in jail for free speech, what have you got to lose?
Well, yeah, and not only that, Sherman's March to the Sea was directed at civilians. Isn't that the first time? Some 50,000 southern civilians were killed during the war, and I really think if the South had somehow won, they would have been justified in hanging Lincoln as